Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dietmar Schweißgut. I'm the Secretary General of the Austrian-French Center for Rapprochement in Europe. And I'm very happy that we can do this today in cooperation with IFRI, the French Institute for International Relations in Paris, as well as the WIIW, the Vienna Institute for Comparative Economic Studies. It is part of a series of events which we have been doing also in cooperation with the French Embassy in Vienna. The topic of today is Global Gateway, the New European Silk Road, and the subtitle I think is a bit more revealing, Boosting European Connectivity and the EU Strategic Autonomy Against the Backdrop of EU-China Rivalry. Now, I think it's very topical because only 10 days ago, the Commission came forward with, I think, a very important communication under the name of Global Gateway, which is a new brand name for a European connectivity strategy, building on previous work, but contrary to what was in the EU-Asia connectivity strategy 3 years ago. We are now talking here about a global connectivity strategy. Many comments have linked it, obviously, to the ambition of the European Union to become a more geostrategic actor and also sort of develop strategic economy in a field where it has for a long time held many advantages, strategic advantages. The European Union has for a long time been the major donor in the world and also has significant experience in building infrastructure. It's obviously also linked to the green and digital agenda and has a strong focus on democracy, human rights and transparency, as well as sustainability in all its aspects. We have, I think, a great panel today discussing this. First of all, I would like to mention Ambassador Romana Vlahutin, who is the Special Envoy of the European External Action Service for Connectivity. Then Mario Holzner, who is the Executive Director of the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies in Vienna. And last but not least, Plamen Tonchev, Americ's European China Policy Fellow and also head of the Asia unit at the Institute of International Economic Relations in Athens, from where he joins us today. So I will suggest that we approach maybe the topic from different angles based on also different focuses of expertise of the three panelists, but obviously since the main topic and the starting point is the Commission's communication, I would like to start with Ambassador Vlahutin. And Romana, maybe you could give us an outline of what this is all about, why it is sort of starting a new era of connectivity cooperation for the European Union and how you see it unfold. Romana, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. I will try to be brief and I will try to walk you through some of the key elements of why, what, and how, with the hope that in the end we will have some time for questions and answers. European Union has been working on connectivity forever. European Union is a product of connectivity, but we have been looking at this as a comprehensive tool since EU-Asia connectivity strategy in 2018. I think what made a step change, or what brought a step change in terms of our interdependencies and the strategic infrastructure is a dimension brought by the digital industrial revolution. I think digital really changed everything. And all of a sudden it became clear that strategic infrastructure has major impact and control over data flows, creation of trade routes, value chains, but also norms and standards, the normative frameworks in which we operate. And the world became interconnected in a way that can both spur economic and social development like never before, but can also be abused and has clear geopolitical consequences. The strategy of 2018 was looking at the space between EU and Asia, so Eurasian continent, if you wish. And it was more of a convergence strategy than investment strategy. So it talked more about sort of convergence between different normative spaces, but explicitly said it was not an investment strategy. Number of things became clear since the publishment of that strategy, though. The first one was a full understanding of a massive need that is out there. There are estimates that globally there is a need for around, it's the World Bank estimate, around 2 trillion euros annually for the investment in the next generation of infrastructure. That's a huge amount of money. And also it became clear that it's hard to talk about convergence without investment. You can't separate the two. I think it's really important to invest in very concrete projects so they can serve as a model and explanation of what this convergence is about. The second thing was COVID crisis, which also has exposed a number of vulnerabilities, especially when it comes to value chains and understanding how they are shaped and why to have more control of the way that we are linked among themselves. And then also, I think, final understanding that this is very highly competitive, but also very collaborative space, and that European Union has extremely high global credentials, that we have resources, that we have knowledge, and that we have very sophisticated experience of connectivity ourselves. And if we talk about European strategic sovereignty and European ability to act, connectivity is probably one of the most mature or the most comprehensive tools that we can use. It all brought us to the Global Gateway. I think it was 2 weeks ago that the communication was made public. As an upgraded version of connectivity strategy from 2018 in number of elements. First, it is, I think, a very clear, and I hope you will agree, a very clear political message of European Union's willingness and ability to proactively provide an alternative offer to our partners when it comes to building the next generation infrastructure. But an offer which is based on 2 fundamentals that have already been there in 2018 strategy. One is sustainability, be it environmental, social, fiscal sustainability, and the second is level playing field. I think it's really important to keep repeating these 2 fundamentals because they, for us, are the main framework. We want to be investing in projects that do invest in quality jobs, that do invest in skill development, that do invest in, of course, economic growth, that do invest in environmental sustainability and are always done on the basis of the level playing field so that all partners in this endeavor are equal. The second big difference is scope. This is a global strategy. European Union has a global reach and needs to have, the strategy needs to reflect this. Therefore, it's something, and I hope that we will be able to talk a bit about that later on. It is something that will be also tailor-made given the different needs of different regions where we are present. Then the difference is scale. In connectivity, scale is critical. You want to invest in transformational projects, and there you need large inputs. what is interesting about European Union, I mean, the first thing I did when I started the job, I wanted to see the numbers. And when you look at the numbers and when you look at the facts and figures, it is clear that European Union is already leading globally in terms of the ODA or development assistance. In terms of FDI, we are 13 trillion in comparison to, let's say, China around 1.5 trillion. But what has always been a problem is our granularity. We do this from different angles. We don't call it the same way, and you cannot see the whole picture. And this was very important to address. How do we pool our many resources? How do we pool our many instruments? When we talk about financing, I can mention it a bit later on. There are a number of things that are available. And I think having one brand or an umbrella brand for the investment in critical infrastructure is really important, because it will also help explain the scale at which European Union and its member states are investing in the world. What is the third element, and is going to be really critical, is the involvement of private sector. This is something that I think is understood by everyone. This cannot be done with public money only. The needs are such that we absolutely need to involve private sector to a very large degree. There are some ideas on how to do that as well. And finally, there is a clear point on partnerships. You know, connectivity is not a lonely job. You have to do it with your partners, with like-minded partners. There is a lot of discussion going on within the G7 group, then G20 as well. You probably know that we have negotiated connectivity partnerships with Japan and India under the old strategy, that we have a ministerial statement with ASEAN, and this is something that we want to explore more and see what are going to be the best ways of working with our partners. Is it a labor division? Is it doing some of the things together? And what are the best sort of institutional frameworks to do this? But what is key is to implement the ideas and the whole understanding of connectivity from the communication, of course. And I will just mention a few things on how do we proceed from here, because I guess these are the issues that are going to be most interesting for our audience. There are several elements that are also new in comparison to the old approach. First is on governance. It is critical to have a strategic lead on this, to define priorities, to identify flagships, and there will be a steering group at the top level. The idea is to focus again on transformative and high impact projects, to also focus on some key sectors. It will definitely be digital, energy, transport, innovation and research, to look at some of the key regions. Maybe we can discuss that a little bit later, but for sure, we are talking about our neighborhood, we're talking about Africa, we're talking about Indo-Pacific and especially ASEAN. The second element will be the strategic discussion with partners on the ground. This is an investment into economic but also societal growth. And ultimately, what it should result with is a greater resilience of a partner, greater competitiveness of a partner, and giving them options. I think by having partners more resilient and more competitive, that makes us more resilient and more competitive, and is something that works well for everyone. And then also how to devise a very user-friendly model for businesses and IFRIs to come and join us in this project. In terms of financial tools and instruments, we have quite a lot at our disposal. We have in the new MFF, you have quite a large portion of the guarantee facilities for investments abroad. We have large grants. We have a discussion for a joint sort of export credit facility or coordinated export credit facility for member states. And it is really important to make a link between higher standards or sustainability and cheaper financing or more available financing, because I think this is what ultimately is going to be the most attractive and most important long-term element of it. And here, European Union has quite a lot of maneuvering space, because the ODA that we are collectively providing, I'm not talking only about institutions or European Union MFF part, but also all member states, is the most competitive in the world, and it gives us a lot of possibilities to rebalance the risk, rebalance the cost. What I think is going to be important is to look also, bankable projects always find financing. What is important is to look at projects that are not fully there, but are existentially important for the countries or the regions and are going to help in a major way get the economy growing. So there is that margin that we should be looking at, and this new global gateway framework should help us. I think I'm going to stop there. I hope I gave you some elements for questions and discussion later on, but that would be for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Romana, for this overview, which already I think gave a very comprehensive picture. Of course, you mentioned at the outset two things. One is that connectivity is something which is almost in the European genes, since the European Union was built on connectivity. And of course, you also focused very much on the global nature of the new Global Gateway initiative. That's why it is called global. Now, I think a lot of people ask, well, is connectivity in Europe already completed so that the European Union can now focus on connecting to the outward world? And I think that is one of the issues which the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, and especially its executive director, Mario Holzner, who is with us, has been focusing on, because I think when he looked at the map in Europe, he also felt that there was quite a bit of need to develop connectivity links in and around Europe. And he published a first study in 2018 under the name of A European Silk Road, and has been working on this ever since. So I think it would be interesting to hear a bit of how sort of this concept of developing connectivity in Europe and around Europe connects and builds itself into the concept of a global gateway, as you outlined it, based on the Commission communication. So with that, I maybe would like to turn to Mario and ask him to explain a bit his thinking on this.
Thank you very much. I will share a few slides with you. Right, so our own idea started basically from us analyzing wider Europe in economic terms and in a comparative way. And what always strikes is this map of Europe, which shows huge disparities in GDP per capita, purchasing power parities. Roughly speaking, one could say that about 500 million people living in the EU have about double the income level of around 500 million people living east in the eastern parts of wider Europe, including, let's say, also the regions around Black Sea and Caspian Sea. What can be done? A classical way to deal with this, and Romana has already mentioned, is to invest, for instance, in infrastructure, in connectivity, in the broadest sense. And if one looks at a map that indicates modern highway density, then this map looks fairly similar to the one we saw before. It's again a west versus east. There are little differences here and there, but more or less it's the same. So while it is, I think there are many studies, it's true that investing in infrastructure brings also higher development. Causality probably goes in both ways. So richer countries also can afford better infrastructure. And in that sense, it is, I think, important that within the Global Gateway initiative, also richer countries like the EU countries are helping others to establish modern infrastructure. Our own suggestion for wider Europe was this proposal of a European Silk Road. Dietmar, as you mentioned, we started this initiative in 2018 with a study that looked at how could something like that look like, what would be the costs, what would be the effects of it. I mean, these are obviously colorful lines on a map in the first instance, and it is not so important, I think, where exactly it lies, but we have developed some ideas around what would make sense, and we had two routes, one northern, one southern. Certainly a centerpiece would be, in this respect, the line from Lyon to Moscow, but with possible extensions all the way to the Kazakh border and on the one side, and to Lisbon on the other side. A combination of e-mobility highways with various ports, logistic centers, but particularly at its core, a high-speed rail system, which I think, and I will elaborate on that a little bit more later on, is essential for Europe. Some key points of this European Silk Road would be around 11,000 kilometers on land, with possible extensions also via sea connections. As mentioned, huge market potential, about 500 million west, 500 million east, connecting these areas with very different income levels. We have made very conservative, i.e. high estimates of project costs around €1 trillion, which is about 7% of EU GDP. This is a lot of money, but then again, if you think that this would take 10 to 20 years of construction, it again spreads out, and for Europe, for the EU as a whole, this is not a lot of money. We have also calculated some short-run growth effects of the construction. Again, very conservative, very low-end estimates probably would be much higher and much more than 2 million jobs created. And average growth rates across very different countries of around 3.5%. This is cumulative. A lot of time saving, again, very conservative estimates of much higher trade along this route. But let me mention, I think that the economic effects are probably not even the most important ones. I think such an initiative could create the possibility to have common infrastructure standards, for instance, in e-mobility, but particularly also in high-speed rail. And even more so, I think it's about more political, personal, and also cultural cooperation between Europeans in a larger Europe. And above all, I think it would create a new narrative for the continent. I think the old narrative after the end of the Second World War is not anymore working very well. People in Europe don't remember that period anymore. It's something new we need. And I think, for instance, a high-speed rail network could be one of those big missions that also our colleague Mrs. Mazzucato is talking about as a form to bring together all kinds of actors, not only the public sectors, the private and so on. We have then in 2019 published also a study on how to organize it, how to finance it. I won't go into the details, but there have been some ideas that, for instance, a European sovereign wealth fund supported by ECB assets and or profits could be a main guarantor for a European Silk Road Trust company, which would issue bonds and which would construct and operate a European Silk Road and then basically build this whole thing. One could do things very differently, that is clear. What we suggested would be an extra budgetary financing structure, which I think would be important to bring, for instance, the so-called frugal countries within the Union to support something like that, so it would not add to public debt. I think if Norway's oil fund can be an important player in the financial markets, I think also a European Silk Road, a European sovereign wealth fund could do that as well. We have calculated different models here, but obviously things could work via also increasing capital of the EIB or the EFSI and what have you. So I think basically under circumstances of zero or real negative interest rates, probably for a long time to come, I think financing is not the most difficult thing in such an environment. But let me come to a most recent study that we have been published in this series of studies. And by the way, in 2020, we had a joint study with our sister institutes in Germany and France, the IMK in Düsseldorf and the OFCE in Sciences Po in Paris, where we reiterated the idea of European Silk Road and focused more on also an EU high-speed rail network. We have now most recently a study together with colleagues from the Central European University, which unfortunately moved from Budapest to Vienna. Good for Vienna, bad for, I think, Central Eastern Europe in general. And it will be published on I think on Monday. And here I can share with you already a few results of that. What particularly our colleagues from the CEU have been doing was to estimate what would be the CO2 avoidance if we created, for instance, on the central line from Lyon to Moscow, a high-speed rail network. We focused on the passenger transport with the high-speed rail, and we came up with a figure of up to 10% CO2 avoidance of a year in the EU. If you calculate a 60-year construction and operation estimate of such a high-speed rail line from Lyon to Moscow. This is, on the one hand, not huge, but it's also not nothing. It is, I think, could be one of the building blocks for the fulfillment of the Paris climate goals for the EU. We should not forget that if those goals would have to be met in not that many years from now, Europe would need to reduce CO2 emissions in the transport sector by as much as 90%. This is huge. And I think it's important to understand that we would particularly need to cut on air transport if this goal should be met. We have done various scenarios. We have construction models, we have passenger substitution models, and here conservative, medium, optimistic versions. And we have here in this table the years to offset the construction emissions. And this is, it really depends basically on our assumptions on passenger substitution. That is, I think, one of the messages here. It could work from a little bit more than 3 years all the way to some 37 years. So there is a certain bandwidth. I think it's important to mention, if we would include also estimates for freight transport, the projected CO2 savings could potentially even double. There are studies on that as well. We will deal next year, likely with another study that focuses on freight transport. And the positive climate impact very much depends on the modal shift. So the shift away from air transport to, in this case, high-speed rail transport. We know that it is critical that we can offer people a transport of less than a transport time of less than 4 hours. That is when people shift from air to train. And with a high-speed rail network that would have average travel times, travel velocities of something like 250 to 300 kilometers per hour, we could have a huge shift from everything that is around 1,000 kilometers distance, and that is really a lot within Europe. So I think this is one of the main messages that we have with this paper. And let me stop here and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mario, for this very interesting presentation, and also for being very concrete and sharing the slides with us, which I think sort of give a fairly clear picture of what you propose. And I'm sure we have an opportunity to come back in the next round a bit to some of the details and how it would connect also financially to some of the proposals made in the framework of the Global Gateway, but also to what extent it could link also to the European Recovery Program, which of course does mention connectivity in a slightly different form in various aspects. As we pointed out in our outline of the project, connectivity is also something which has to be seen against the background of how we called it EU-China rivalry. Now, I think we should also be clear here. We are not talking only about EU-China rivalry. We are also talking about EU-China cooperation, which has been going on for a long time. And I already mentioned that a number of years ago. It was actually the European Union having suggested a European China connectivity platform. But the fact is that ever since China came up with the idea of the Belt and Road Initiative and pushed it very heavily in a number of ways, this project always contained sort of a mixture of possible opportunities for cooperation, but it was also seen as the main vehicle for China's geostrategic strategy, and in that respect also more recently became engulfed to a large extent also in the US-China rivalry, which has developed into a confrontation. And therefore, I think we are all looking at it in a slightly different light. So I think it would be useful 8 years after the speech made by President Xi in Kazakhstan at the time when he first proposed, to take stock of it and to see where we stand with the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, to what extent it influenced European thinking and how it possibly compares to the Global Gateway, and where apart from the competitive aspects, still a certain potential for cooperation would lie. And with that, I would like to turn to Plamen Tonchev, who has been working on Asia, especially China-related issues for a long time, and who is certainly also an expert on the Belt and Road Initiative. Plamen, please.
Many thanks, Dietmar. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to what is already evolving as a fascinating and very useful and timely discussion. Of course, I will speak about China and its BRI, but let me say a couple of words about the Global Gateway after the inspiring comments made by the previous speakers. I would fully agree with Romana that the EU is a multinational species. It is based on connectivity. It's part of its DNA. So I would say that the Global Gateway is a natural development building on previous policy documents over the past few years. And in fact, I would say that the very concept, the very idea of connectivity in the Eurasian landmass is nothing new. It's been there for a while. You may remember the Troseka programs back in the 90s and later on, aiming at boosting transport connectivity through Central Asia all the way to China. So the idea has been there, and I would say that the gateway was long overdue in many ways. So it's a very positive development that this initiative or program, rather initiative, I would say, has been announced by the European Commission. And we know that this hasn't been an easy process. We know that it took quite some time to deliver this baby, and we know of the birth pangs, if I may say so, of the Global Gateway. But in any case, it's commendable, and I think it's also an indication and a demonstration of the fact that the EU should indeed become a player and not just a playing field, as Charles Michel has aptly said. I think that what is very interesting in the very language of the Global Gateway communication, we should single out certain phrases, catchphrases, which already point out directly or indirectly to China and China's BRI. I've certainly taken note of the fact that there's this reference to the highest social and environmental standards, which clearly is a reference to China's BRI, which has been marred by a number of controversial projects precisely because of the relatively low standards of Chinese contractors. I'm certainly taking note of the fact that there's this catchphrase in the communication to quality infrastructure, which makes me think of Japan's quality infrastructure program. So there's this indirect reference to like-minded partners that the EU is thinking about. There's also democratic values, yet another catchphrase or slogan that possibly relates to the United States as yet another like-minded partner. And of course, I would say that the most striking phrase in the communication on the Global Gateway is that we should be seeking to create strong and sustainable links, not dependencies. Now, I think that's a not so thinly veiled reference to dependency on Chinese capital along BRI routes. So let me also say that by speaking about the Global Gateway itself, marketing and selling this new EU strategy is important. I would say that the Global Gateway is quite a nice finding. It's a catchy name that allows for the easier promotion and improved EU visibility. But at the same time, let me make a sobering remark that we shouldn't lose sight of the nitty-gritty of making the Global Gateway work. And it's a fact that the Global Gateway actually repackages various existing facilities and tools, and coordinating them will be quite a challenging task. Now, to be fair to the European Commission, and of course other EU institutions, if we compare the Global Gateway to China's BRI, it took the Chinese quite some time to conceptualize their own initiative. It was, as Dietmar rightly pointed out, announced in September 2013 in Astana, Kazakhstan. And then it took the Chinese a year and a half, 18 months, to come up with what is now known as the Vision and Action, a policy document setting out the principles and the various pillars of the BRI. I think that the Global Gateway may need some time to conceptualize this initiative and make it really operational. Now, can the Global Gateway and China's BRI interact, or will they be antagonistic and competitive? I would say that the BRI itself has been changing, and it's been changing for the better. It is being recalibrated, and I'd say that this process has been underway. It started even before the pandemic broke out. I would say that perhaps in 2019, the Chinese started speaking out in public about greening and cleaning the BRI because of all the controversial cases, because of all the dependencies, because of all the debate on a possible debt trap and all that. So I think that the Chinese BRI is getting better slowly but steadily. And this is good news. I would say that this might leave some room for interaction between the EU's ambitions, the Global Gateway and China's BRI. Of course, competition will not disappear. And mind you, geopolitics will not disappear. It's an inherent aspect to both China's BRI, the EU's Global Gateway, and I would say connectivity initiatives launched by other major actors. But I think it would be good news if the EU's Global Gateway puts some additional pressure on China, so that Chinese contractors improve their standards in terms of environmental protection, labor and social standards. So this could be a positive development to be kept in mind and certainly to be made the most of. At the same time, I'm also taking note of the fact China's initial reaction to the announcement of the Global Gateway has not been particularly welcoming. It looks like for the time being, China is looking at the Global Gateway as an antagonistic initiative. And certainly the EU is a competitor. This is how it is perceived by China. I would say that I do not expect some real direct cooperation between the BRI and the Global Gateway tomorrow early in the morning. I think that what is more likely to happen is that the EU will boost and enhance its cooperation with like-minded partners, at least in the Eurasian landmass, or possibly in other continents as well. But of course, we should not dismiss possible discussions with the Chinese on whether or not these two highly competitive initiatives could have some commonalities. I'll stop at this point and I'll be happy to take questions during the Q&A. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Blam, and thank you also for elaborating, I think, in a very clear way about the differences between the concepts and where potential for cooperation lies, but warning us against being over-optimistic against the background of geopolitical competition. There is also one aspect, I think, which is clearly mentioned in the Global Gateway strategy at different points, which focuses not only on linking projects and the partnerships to human, social, labor rights, transparency, sustainability, both environmentally and financially, but there is also sort of quite a bit of emphasis on open procurement and competition in a way which, of course, we see in a Western conceptualization as very positive aspects of competition. And I think one thing also when we look at the relationship to China and its engagement in infrastructure is also its engagement in our near neighborhood. And of course, when it comes to procurement, what still irks a bit is the project, for instance, of the Belsejac Bridge in Croatia, which was mostly funded by the European Union, but which eventually was given to a Chinese contractor on what many people thought was based on subsidies, because the contractor we actually won was a state-owned enterprise. So that is, I think, one of the important things. But what I wanted to do now is also focus maybe on an area which was not specifically mentioned in our discussion so far, namely the Western Balkans, and also the Eastern Partnership. It's a coincidence that today we have the Eastern Partnership Summit, and obviously both in the Western Balkans but also in the Eastern Partnership, connectivity does play an important role. And in the context of the Western Balkans, of course, we have the economic and infrastructure plan as an important component. But the question came up a bit also in a question that's already put by the audience, is what is in the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans? Is this everything which will be offered also in the framework of the Global Gateway? And to what extent is the Global Gateway also a bit of a repackaging exercise of things which were already agreed and projected earlier? And one of the issues I would also then like maybe to have Mario comment on, but also the others. Mario, you mentioned very much the West-East or East-West connectivity in Europe. What is also, I think, something which has been focused on more in the past is that in the eastern half of the continents, we also lack north-south connections. And this is what the 3Cs initiative also wanted to address, and which I think is an important part. So maybe in the next round, could I ask you to more specifically address a bit how, in the context of the Global Gateway, possibly also in connection with competition from China, the European Union will focus on infrastructure in the Western Balkans in its eastern and southern neighborhoods, and how this connects. Romana, would you like to start and say a few things on that?
Sure, let me unmute myself. Let me just first also come back to the Pelješac Bridge that you mentioned. Pelješac Bridge has nothing to do with the BRI. It's a purely commercial project that was won under certain circumstances, which were, fully in line with the EU regulations then. And I think there are some lessons learned, and the regulations have evolved. And I think our colleagues have been working on the whole procurement aspect of things and level playing field. And I think we are in a different place now. So that's also important to understand and to make a distinction between purely commercial things and investments in critical and strategic infrastructure that are also based on a bit of sort of developmental logic to assist countries to develop and catch up. Thank you very much for mentioning Eastern Neighborhood and Western Balkans. Indeed, I think these are going to be and are, by definition, one of the key areas or parts or regions where that should benefit from the logic of Global Gateway massively, I would say, because we do have, you mentioned already, economic and infrastructure plan and investment plans for both. It makes ample sense. For the Western Balkans, when you look at the map, I mean, this is an enclave within the EU territory, if you wish. And whatever we invest in the Western Balkans, we are by definition investing in the EU connectivity as well. For me, from Croatia to come to visit Plamen in Athens by car, would take me through several Western Balkan countries and would take me many, many hours, much more than I think is reasonable in the 21st century. So investment in our immediate neighborhood is an absolute given. And you have mentioned the word repackaging. Is it, you know, the same money but repackaged, etc.? I want to again repeat, even thus far, European Union has been investing the most. But the visibility of our investment was not very clear because it was granular. It was fragmented and you couldn't really put it all together. I think what Global Gateway wants to change, it wants to bring more strategic thinking in how we invest. And this is where it should really help us define what the priorities are, and they will certainly be in our neighborhood. You know that we already have a map of TNT extensions to the neighborhood, and there is also, I think, a very important work ongoing on mapping, in particular, the middle corridor, which you saw with the red color on Mario's map. I have been looking at some really interesting studies on the southern corridor, how to connect Mediterranean through the Gulf with India. And in general, I think it would be important to understand the space and what is or what links and corridors would make most sense for us. This is where you know, investment in the neighborhood is something that for Europeans is also very important, given, I think, the need to look more into detail in diversification of value chains, on nearshoring of value chains, etc. And there can be a lot of benefit for our neighbors, which will make them prosper and will make us prosper and all of us safer.
Mario, would you like to comment also on the near neighborhood, the Western Balkans and beyond, and maybe if you could also say a word on how you see the 3 Cs initiative and what some see sort of the missing focus on the north-south connections in Eastern Europe.
Absolutely. Let me first maybe say that the CO2 study I mentioned before was also published as a book chapter in the most recently in the 2021 European Public Investment Outlook, and can be downloaded from open book publishers. But let me come back to your question. Absolutely, I think from a perspective of the Western Balkans, of the Eastern Partnership countries, any additional initiative, such as, for instance, also the 3 Cs initiative, is a positive add-on, and it provides also more competition in terms of sources of financing, and hence is good for the region. And certainly also this north-south idea is in any case also an important one. Let me maybe say that from a perspective of the countries, particularly in the Western Balkans, where the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative was most active, it is an advantage for the political class that the Chinese are much faster in terms of providing financing for large infrastructure projects. And if you, as a politician, need to have a election maybe next year, then it might be for you the better option to go for the Chinese investment. So in that sense, I think the EU support will need to also think about these time schedule issues that are important in a political cycle. So I think that is something to bear in mind, and I guess that an umbrella initiative like the Global Gateway would be an option to actually deal with these issues as well. It is true, Romana mentioned it already. The trans-European networks, the TENs, which started in the 90s, have been extended to both the Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership countries. I think very important. However, let us be sure these are very specific projects. It is a bypass here, a small stretch of a highway there. It is single smaller projects that we are talking about. It's not the big border crossing EU or Europe value added projects that we see there. So I think what is still missing a little bit are these projects that are connecting over several countries and cross several borders. Crossing the border is the big problem in infrastructure. We see very few projects, such as the Brenner Basistunnel, for instance, with all its problems connecting Italy, Austria, and Germany. I think a more successful project was Rail Baltica, which stretches basically from Poland through the Baltic republics, in a way also all the way to Finland. So I think we should learn from some of the best practice examples how to actually move one step further and connect infrastructure over a number of borders. I think that would be important issues to look at in the coming years.
Thank you very much. Blamen, would you like, when you also comment on this issue of the Western Balkans and the neighborhood, also maybe focus a bit on what the Chinese have been doing there? And of course, there have also been arguments that one of the examples of the debt trap, which was sometimes also linked to the Belt and Road Initiative, as a good example in Montenegro, the highway. There have also been, and these are questions from the audience, questions related to corruption and to the fact how in the Balkans we haven't really focused very much on green investment. On the other hand, when I was in Paris for a conference 2 weeks ago, there was in the context of French engagement and cooperation with the Western Balkans, one example which was mentioned of a cooperation project with China, namely the metro in Belgrade, where there are talks between Chinese and French companies. Now, I wasn't aware of that. It sounded as an interesting project, but still, it seems, especially when it comes to the Western Balkans, cooperation with China on projects rather the exception than already a trend. How would you see that?
Thanks very much. In the Western Balkans, which is indeed a topical issue, I would say that the EU has been clearly underperforming. But at the same time, I wouldn't point a finger exclusively at the EU. One needs to take into account local peculiarities, to put it very mildly, mostly in terms of institutions, transparency, accountability, and all that. And I would say that, yes, the EU needs to up the ante, but at the same time, Western Balkan elites will also have to play a meaningful part. On Montenegro, which is a case in point, again, I wouldn't put all the blame on the Chinese, because the story in Montenegro clearly shows that it takes two to tango. You will remember that in Montenegro, when the Montenegrin government wanted to attract investment capital, they turned to the European Investment Bank and the EBRD. Both feasibility studies came up with a negative verdict. Then the Montenegrins turned to China. There was a study commissioned by the China Development Bank to the University of Montenegro. And suddenly it came up with a positive verdict. Yes, it's doable, let's do it. And take a wild guess, China Development Bank, which had commissioned this study, provided the loan and so on. I think it's not just fishy, it's all too obvious, isn't it? There is a case of, to be made about collusion and lack of transparency. And then Montenegro found itself in this terrible debt trap. And again, take a wild guess, it turned to the EU for a bailout. I mean, there are very many lessons learned from the Montenegrin story. But I would say that by and large, the EU has been underperforming. And since we're talking about the global gateway, let me tell you this. I think it makes little sense to prioritize Southeast Asia and not prioritize Southeast Europe. It's a bit like putting, the cart before the horse. I think we should have a look at Europe's neighborhood before reaching out to other parts of the planet. I take it as an absolute priority for the EU to invest and certainly to assist the Western Balkans. On the Pelishat Bridge, that's also a very interesting case. I fully agree with Romana that that's a commercial contract, of course, with the Chinese winning the tender the way they did. But interestingly, if you look at Chinese media, they present it as a BRI project. So there's this question of visibility and truth, and truthfully presenting Chinese projects in Europe. On the 3C initiative, it's been driven or at least endorsed by the United States, again as a response to the 17+1 format, which is now back to 16+1. In any case, I'd say that the 3C initiative is still in its early days. There's money to be committed, and of course, it needs to be properly conceptualized. It needs to be properly designed. And I think that it may take some extra time to design something before implementing it. So be it. I fully agree with Mario that the Chinese are good at delivering speedily. Speed is, their thing. They're very proud of working fast, but at the expense of quality. There's this, since I'm sitting in Athens, let me quote this ancient Greek saying, "Spev de vraveos," which then traveled into Latin as "festina lente." And in English, it sounds out as "make haste slowly." I think this should be the slogan of the Global Gateway: design properly and deliver properly. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm sure that Romana has a few things to respond to that. Yeah.
Yes, I do, and to Plamen, I would not agree that European Union has been underperforming in the Western Balkans. Not only because I sit where I sit here in Brussels, but also before coming here, I was an EU ambassador to Albania, and I have seen massive changes that have been happening in the country. Thanks to European Union investment. I don't know if your audience is informed, but for example, at the moment there is a lot of push for finishing the Corridor 5C through Bosnia-Herzegovina, which links Central Europe with the Adriatic Sea, Corridor 10, Corridor 8, one of the two very important projects in the new package are Blue Highway, which is north-south, and Peace. Blue Highway is from Italy to Greece, along the Adriatic coast, and then the Peace Highway, which is north-south. There is a lot of investments in everything in the Western Balkans. It is a complex convergence that is happening. And one of the essential parts of that is transparency. And this is where I absolutely do agree with Plamen, that things need to be done at a reasonable speed, I would say, but with a lot of due diligence, so that our investments have a proper life cycle, that when you invest in a highway, it makes sense and it brings profit to the country where it has been invested. We have seen the situation in Montenegro. There were some similar other ones in North Macedonia with railway, was an interesting project, which I understand from the colleagues from Skopje in the end costed, the preliminary works costed more than 3 times than envisaged. There are some coal investments in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Bosnia-Herzegovina authorities were approached by the European Union with the explanation not only that you are investing in the wrong technology, you are also investing in a technology that will mean that your transition and the work on the green transition with the EU is going to take even more time. It makes absolutely no sense to invest in coal at this point in time. So there is a massive amount of investment, which sometimes I have to say is sort of taken for granted, because this is what the European Union does. And we need to be really better in focusing on what we are doing and explaining what we are doing and what are the long-term consequences of that. So again, insisting on standards and pressure on standards, as Plamen phrased it, I think very well, is a very important element in this discussion. It pushes. It's a race to the top, not to the bottom, and this is what we want. And it should be changed for the better. It should help raise the standards across the board. And it is always for the benefit of the projects and the recipient countries. So in that sense, I think what we are doing, we need to double down. And for the European Union, you will always see that Eastern neighborhood and the Western Balkans, or Western Balkans and the Eastern neighborhood, are a given priority. There is no need to every time particularly emphasize that. I think it's a given priority. So work there continues. What I think is important, that it's also a part of sort of the larger undertaking, that we don't take things in pieces, but we see this as a European Union global investment in critical infrastructure. And I believe then that the regional programs and projects will benefit from that as well.
Thank you, Werner. There has been one comment from the audience I see on the Q&A, suggesting that the EU's involvement in infrastructure financing has so far focused much more on road connectivity than on rail connections. How would you respond to that?
I'm not a transport expert, and I understand that the trend is changing, given also the environmental concerns, etc. There has been a lot of investment through the EIB in India, for example, and we are, I think, in general, moving into a sort of far more clear-eyed look on what kind of investments in transport will also make sense in terms of environmental standards. That is of great importance. There are investments in rail in the regions that we have already mentioned. I know for sure for the Western Balkans. So this is something that certainly is looked at from the point of the convergence. But what I think is important also, that we take the moment of the green and digital transition and really invest in that. I don't know if you're aware, but there has been a decision that 30% of the all assistance financing in the new MFF is going to go for the green transition, 30%. And 10% will go to the digital transition. And both are very important, and both can help greater economic growth in the countries where they are invested. There's one element where I think we need to put more pressure and more attention. That's knowledge and skills. I think investment in development and innovation is very important, and Global Gateway also pays attention to that.
Thank you. Mario, would you like to comment also on this issue of focus on the neighborhood, Western Balkans in the framework of Global Gateway, and the question of are we doing enough and in the right sequence?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the initiatives presented earlier for the Western Balkans were incorporated in the Global Gateway system. So I would see it like a cascade of initiatives in the connectivity field, where we have now a big umbrella that has a global and probably also very much a focus also on Africa, bringing this continent closer to us, which I think will be crucial for the decades to come. If you just look at the development that large parts of Africa had for the last decade already, and also the population increases, that will be very important. We might not see it at the moment as so important, but I think that will increase very much in importance. And yeah, and the pre-accession instruments that were there already for the Western Balkan countries are now incorporated in this Global Gateway system, and these are mix of grants and loans, if I remember correctly, of around 30 billion for this 7-year program, which are dedicated to projects in the connectivity area. And it is true, as Romana said, maybe in the past there was more focus maybe on roads and so on, which are also important. I mean, we should not forget that these regions where the road network is not in the best state, but that the trend is going now really into rail investment, which are also very much needed, not only new railway lines, but particularly also the rehabilitation of existing railway lines. So for instance, the electrification of the Durres-Tirana line would be an example, I think, which is very, very useful. But there are many others as well. And true, we will need to bring also the Europe's green agenda to our neighborhood, to our accession countries, and invest very much in renewable energy, in the interconnectors of which is maybe even more important to really bring together the different types of energy that is being produced. So for instance, if we stay in Albania, the country is almost 100% on hydropower, while others have a very different mix. And once we can connect these energy generators across Europe, but also in the Western Balkans, we can have also much better overall mix that again will be very much needed in order to reach the Paris climate goals.
Thank you. We are coming slowly to the end, but I would like to maybe focus also once again a bit on the global dimension, after having now focused very much on the neighborhood. And of course, as Romana has mentioned at the beginning, one of the main aspects of the Global Gateway initiative is also cooperating with like-minded partners, other initiatives. Japan was mentioned, India, the United States, the G7 came up with a statement on building back better. So connectivity seems to be very much at the forefront of interest, also, of course, in the context of geopolitical competition. And some people would argue a lot of it really has to do with the fact that the West, to use this term, has belatedly tried to come up with a response to the the Chinese challenge as it was seen. But the question still is, will it really be possible to coordinate all these initiatives in a meaningful way so that we have positive competition in offering solutions to needed investment in partner countries? Or are we entering into a situation where this competition really is based mostly on geopolitical considerations? And there, of course, the questions comes up, 300 billion for the European Union, which is still an aspirational figure, is an important one, but is it enough given the breadth of the ambition? And how will we really be able sort of to have some kind of leadership from the European side in bringing the different strands together? And how will we do this also in the face of increasing confrontation and competition between the United States and China? How to carve out a role for the European Union to make sure that the concept of the global gateway will prevail among competing concepts. How would you see that? And maybe we could do this in reverse order to finish, Plum. And how would you see this also from the point of view you mentioned earlier, that there seems to have been a bit of a positive influence on the Belt and Road Initiative, in the sense that in a number of aspects, it seemed to move a bit more to our conception of what connectivity should mean.
Right. Let me start out by saying that you remember the way connectivity became a trendy notion several years ago. But I think that because of geopolitics, and geopolitics is back, let's admit this, the debate has now moved from connectivity and the benefits of connectivity to the security of connectivity. And the pandemic is a case in point, because it's through globalization and connectivity that the virus spread so quickly on a global scale. And then, of course, geopolitics is a fact of life. I think that the debate on depoliticizing or de-geopoliticizing connectivity is at best wishful thinking, and on many occasions possibly even disingenuous. Geopolitics will be part of connectivity. We should accept that. Now, on the global gateway and the way it is meant to stand out, we should also accept the fact that there's no shortage of connectivity initiatives. The Japanese have been working on their quality infrastructure program for quite a while. There's India with its Act East vision. South Korea has its own vision, with this north-south axis. ASEAN, Southeast Asians, have had their connectivity master plan 2025, which is a fairly complex and sophisticated blueprint. There's Russia with its Eurasian Economic Union, and now there's the global gateway. Coordinating all these plans, I think that would be a mission impossible. What is more likely to achieve is some sort of coordination with like-minded partners on the basis of some common standards. Competition with the BRI, I think, will be unavoidable, but we shouldn't stop seeking, some sort of commonalities, which will have a beneficial effect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mario, of course, your Silk Road doesn't end in China. It ends mostly in Russia, but there the political dimension also plays a role. Would you like to comment on that also?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I would support what Plamen said. Geopolitics and geoeconomics is back. It is very much discussed in relationship also to these transport and energy issues, security of resources, and in that sense, I think Russia is also one of several elephants in the room. I mean, as a matter of fact, everyone knows it, Russia will always remain the big neighbor of the EU in the East. So in one way or another, we have to deal with Russia. And I think I mentioned it, political effects of physical connectivity might be positive. We might want to actually connect with them also via transport, but not only with them, obviously. We have been discussing particularly the Eastern neighborhood, Western Balkans. These are certainly EU's priorities and should be also. And in that respect, I would like to mention another buzzword that was around for a while, nearshoring. We have been also slightly touching this topic. We don't know really whether it will occur. The idea is that we go away from the globalization patterns of the last 2 or 3 decades, where we have seen a lot of outsourcing of far shoring, so to speak, to for instance from Europe to Southeast Asia, and nearshoring would and reshoring also would be trends to bring production back and closer to where actually the headquarters are located in Central Europe, Northern Italy, Southern Germany, Benelux countries, and so on. In the data, we don't see that trend yet. It's a little bit too early. Investment decisions of the private sector in terms of foreign direct investment typically take 2, 3, 4 years. But we have been doing a study together with the Association of German Chambers of Industry and Commerce, where we had also questionnaires, companies, German companies with foreign activity. And there is the wish of those companies to shorten their value chains to actually be engaged in something like nearshoring. And I think the point is that we need to also supply those companies with the respective infrastructure to be able to actually do this, to relocate their production lines to the Western Balkans, for instance, but also Eastern Partnership countries. And I think here again, that would be something that Global Gateway could maybe help to facilitate.
Thank you very much. Romana, you have the final word to wrap up this discussion and also respond to the last 2 interventions and the question of how the European Union wants to position itself in a role of an avant-garde or leadership in the global context and against the geo-economic and geostrategic background.
Thanks. Plamen mentioned word security, and I think security of connectivity would need its additional hour and a half at least of discussion. And there is so much of geopolitics here in particular because there are long-term security implications to connectivity. A big part of it is, of course, digital security. I saw in the Q&A there was a question about artificial intelligence, but not only that. And I think it's very clear that who will secure the lead on the norms and standards now will have the lead in decades to come. And here we really want to be present, and we want to be able to provide options to our partners. I have been talking to a number of colleagues from different regions, and there is always a request. We need a clear offer, an alternative offer from the EU. We know that the quality of European standards will make us more resilient and more competitive. Even having an option makes you more resilient and more competitive. And I think this is really essential. I will finish where I started. and repeat a sentence that this is a European ability to act offer as well. When we talk about strategic sovereignty of the European Union, there are very few items in a way that can compare to our capacities when it comes to connectivity. We really have all elements that are needed. We have the most sophisticated knowledge on how to connect. I think that's undisputable. We know how to overcome differences, how to become interoperable. We learned it on our own skill. This is not something abstract or something theoretical. So we have seen it, and we believe that we have some of the most workable solutions. Then we have industrial power. We have a lot of knowledge and a lot of competitive edge in different segments of industry. We do have financial firepower. And I think we have a rather broad political coalition potential, if you wish. There is a trust in the European willingness to partner on growth and development. So when you put all that combined, I really believe that European Union has a global role to play, is playing a global role. We just need to look at the things and understand where we had some deficiencies and how to fix them and how to move forward in a more coherent way. It's really about coherence of what you are doing. It's about the strategic approach to connectivity. And then I think this coherence and this strategic approach will by definition also make everything that we are doing much more visible. And in that sense, although it has been a process that took some time, I'm very happy that we finally have a platform. I really see it as a platform, as I said, an umbrella brand, which will help both the institutions and all member states to do this. And I will finish with member states. I think it is absolutely crucial, and I'm grateful for all the support we had from member states, that this is seen as a all of Europe project. This needs to have everyone on board to have the scale that we need. And I will finish with that.
Well, thank you very much. I think that has been a very fitting conclusion, and also sort of providing many links to future discussions we could have, because it's, as you say, it took a while until the Commission did come up with it, but it's a very important element, in my view, in the overall geostrategic, geoeconomic agenda of the European Union. But it was a very important missing element, which is now on the table. With that, I would like to thank all of you for what I think has been a very broad and interesting discussion. I'd like to thank all those who have taken time to listen and log in to this discussion, and I hope we can continue this in the future. Next time, hopefully also in a physical context and not only virtually on screen. Many thanks again, and see you soon. Happy holidays and best wishes for a hopefully less pandemic affected New Year.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
the
Bye.
best.